The night was heavy with rain, and every drop that hit the pavement seemed louder than her own heartbeat. She ran without looking back, her shoes splashing through puddles, the water soaking her clothes until she could barely feel her skin. But she didn't care about the rain. She cared only about one thing eating away. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The city streets stretched out in endless lines of lights, but no matter how far she went, she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were following her. Every car that passed, every shadow that moved in the corner of her vision, made her chest tighten. She clutched her small bag close, the last thing she had managed to grab before she escaped. Inside it were scraps of her life, nothing valuable to the world, but everything to her. She didn't know exactly where she was going. She only knew where she couldn't go back. Back meant danger. Back meant being trapped in a place she swore she'd never see again. She had promised herself she would fight for freedom, no matter how painful the road ahead. The rain blurred her vision, mixing with the tears she didn't want to admit were there. Her legs screamed with exhaustion, but she pushed herself harder. People on the sidewalks looked at her with quick glances, then turned away. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked. Maybe they thought she was just another person caught in the storm. Maybe they didn't want to be involved. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Where would she sleep tonight? How long before she was found again? Could she really escape the grip of the past that held her so tightly? The fear in her chest was heavy, but under it was a spark of determination. She had run this far. She would keep running if she had to. Then she heard it. The sound of tires screeching against the wet road. She froze. A sleek black car pulled up just a few feet away. For a moment, panic flared. Was it them? Had they found her already? She thought about bolting into the next alley, but her body felt too weak to move. The car window slid down slowly, and she saw a man sitting inside. He wasn't smiling, but his face carried a strange calm. His voice, deep and steady, cut through the rain. "You shouldn't be out here alone." She didn't answer. She tightened her grip on the strap of her bag and took a step back. "Get in," he said. His tone wasn't sharp, but it wasn't soft either. It was the kind of voice that left no room for questions. Every instinct inside her screamed not to trust him. He was a stranger. For all she knew, this could be another trap. But at the same time, her legs trembled under her, her body screaming for rest, for shelter. The rain was growing colder by the second, sinking deep into her bones that she hesitated, caught between fear and exhaustion. The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes fixed on her. They were sharp, but not unkind. More than anything, they were unreadable. "You can keep running out there," he said, "but sooner or later, someone will catch you. Or you can get in, and at least be dry." The choice pressed down on her like a weight. She had trusted before, and it had led to pain. But what choice did she have now? She couldn't survive the night like this. With trembling hands, she reached for the door handle. The inside of the car was warm, a shocking contrast to the storm outside. She sat in silence, her body stiff, her eyes darting toward the door as if she might jump out at any second. The man didn't look at her right away. He simply drove forward, the car moving smoothly through the rain. Minutes passed without words. The quiet should have been calming, but it wasn't. Every second stretched long, filled with questions she didn't dare ask. Who was he? Why had he stopped for her? What did he want? She pressed her forehead against the cold glass window, watching the city blur past in streaks of light and water. Part of her wanted to thank him, to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was luck, that in a city of millions, she had found someone who would help. But another part of her whispered warnings she couldn't ignore. People didn't offer kindness without reason. Not in her world. Her heartbeat slowed, but not enough to bring peace. She told herself this was just one step, just one ride. She would get out soon, find her way, and keep running. This wasn't trust. She promised herself it was survival. Yet deep down, she felt it. Something about this man wasn't ordinary. Something told her that getting into this car was not the end of her running. It was only the beginning. The car moved quietly through the wet streets, its tires cutting a steady path on the rain-soaked road. She sat pressed against the door, watching the blur of city lights flash by. The silence inside the car was thick, almost heavier than the storm outside. She could hear the soft hum of the engine, the occasional swish of the windshield wipers, and her own uneven breathing. The man at the wheel didn't rush to speak. His hands rested steady on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road with a kind of focus she had never seen before. Everything about him seemed controlled, measured, as if he lived by a rhythm no one else could disturb. She dared a glance at him. His jaw was strong, his features sharp, and there was something about his presence that made the air feel heavier. He wasn't the type of man you ignored, even if he said nothing. Her heart still raced. She wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life by getting into this car. But then again, hadn't she been left with no choice? Her body had been at its limit. Without shelter, she wouldn't have lasted the night. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "Where were you running to?" The question hit her like a sudden spotlight. She froze, her fingers tightening around her bag. Her mind raced with excuses, lies she could tell to keep her past hidden. But when she opened her mouth, no sound came. He didn't press. He simply nodded, as though her silence was answer enough. "You're shaking," he said, almost an observation rather than concern. She looked down at herself. Her clothes clung to her body, still soaked from the rain. Her hair dripped onto the leather seat. She hugged her bag tighter, as if it were her shield. Without asking, he reached forward and pressed a button. Warm air flowed through the car, filling it with gentle heat. "Better," he said simply. She blinked at him, startled by the unexpected gesture. It wasn't kindness exactly, it felt more like efficiency, as though he was solving a problem, the way someone would fix a broken clock. Still, the warmth seeped into her bones, and despite herself, she felt a flicker of relief. The car slowed as they reached a red light. For the first time, he turned to look directly at her. His eyes were dark and steady, the kind of gaze that made you feel small, as if he could see more than you wanted him to. "You don't have anywhere to go," he said. Not as a question, but as a statement. She swallowed hard. He was right, of course, but hearing it out loud stung. She had no home, no family nearby, no friend she could turn to. Only shadows chasing her and a city that didn't care if she disappeared. The light turned green, and he drove on. His voice was calm when he spoke again. "You'll stay at my place tonight. It's safer than the street." Her eyes widened. She immediately shook her head. "No, I can't. You can." He cut her off, not raising his voice, but leaving no room for argument. "It's just one night." Her chest tightened. Every instinct told her not to go, not to trust him. But there was that same pressure again, the sense that refusing him wasn't really an option. He didn't threaten her, but the weight in his words felt immovable, like stone. She turned back to the window, her pulse hammering in her ears. The city streets gave way to quieter neighborhoods, and soon, the towering buildings of downtown faded into the distance. The car climbed a winding road, the kind that only led to places ordinary people never reached. When the car finally stopped, she stared in disbelief. Before her stood a mansion unlike anything she had ever seen up close. Its tall gates opened smoothly as if they had been expecting her all along. Beyond them stretched a driveway lined with lights, leading to a house so vast it seemed like a world of its own. Her breath caught. "This is your place?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He simply stepped out of the car, his movements precise, every action deliberate. He walked to her side, opened the door, and waited. For a moment she hesitated, gripping the seat as though it might protect her. But then she saw the rain still pouring outside, the cold night waiting for her, and she forced herself to step out. The air was different here, cleaner, quieter, as though the storm itself dared not disturb this place. She followed him up the stone steps, her shoes leaving wet marks against the polished floor when they entered. Inside, the house was breathtaking. Marble floors stretched endlessly, chandeliers glowed with soft golden light, and every detail seemed designed to impress. But instead of awe, she felt unease. Luxury this grand didn't belong to kindness. It belonged to power. He led her into a living room where a fire burned gently in the fireplace. "Sit," he said, and she obeyed, her body sinking into the edge of a velvet couch. For the first time since stepping into his car, she found her voice. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. He regarded her for a long moment before answering. "Because you needed it." His words were simple, Yet something in his tone hinted at layers she couldn't see. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to think she had been lucky, that maybe this was a stranger with a heart after all. But the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, left her unsettled. There was something dangerous about him, something he didn't bother to hide. And though she didn't know it yet, the man who had offered her safety was far from an ordinary stranger. He was someone whose world was built on secrets, power, and ruthless control, and she had just walked straight into it. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the room, its glow painting the walls in shades of amber. She sat at the very edge of the couch, still clutching her small bag like it was her last lifeline. The warmth of the room wrapped around her, but the tension inside her chest didn't ease. He stood across from her, silent as ever. He didn't ask questions, didn't move unnecessarily, just watched. It wasn't the watchfulness of a kind host. It was the kind of gaze that measured, as if he were studying her, trying to see beneath the surface. She shifted uncomfortably, wishing the silence would break. The mansion around her was too large, too polished, too perfect. Marble floors stretched under rugs so thick her soaked shoes left no sound. High ceilings rose above with lights shining down like stars. Everything in this place whispered of wealth, power, and control. She thought of the streets outside, the biting rain, the emptiness of having nowhere to turn. She told herself this was better, at least for now. She was dry. She was warm. She was safe, or at least safer than she had been an hour ago. Finally, he spoke. "You should change." She blinked, startled. "Change? You're drenched. There are clothes upstairs. Guest room on the left." The way he said it, calm, clipped, certain, left no room for refusal. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Rising to her feet, she followed his instructions up the grand staircase. Each step echoed faintly, reminding her how far she was from the life she had known before. The guest room was more like a suite. The bed was enormous, covered with crisp sheets, the walls decorated with paintings she couldn't begin to understand. On the bed, folded neatly, were clothes simple but elegant, as if someone had known she was coming. She paused, uneasy. Why would a stranger's home have clothes in her size waiting? She shook the thought away. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was just the kind of house where everything existed in excess, even clothes for unexpected guests. After changing, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The girl staring back looked different, smaller somehow, swallowed by a world too big for her. She pressed her hands against the dresser, steadying herself. "It's just one night," she whispered to her reflection. Just one night. When she returned downstairs, he was still by the fire, his posture straight, his presence filling the room. He turned his head slightly at her rival, his eyes scanning her quickly before he gestured to the chair opposite him. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. He didn't waste words. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, you'll decide what comes next." Her chest tightened. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." His expression barely shifted, but his eyes held something unreadable. "People don't need to know you to see when you're desperate." His words cut sharper than she expected. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed that her fear, her exhaustion, her running had been so obvious. But at the same time, there was no judgment in his tone, only fact. For a long moment, silence stretched again. The only sound was the fire. Finally, she dared to ask, "Do you help strangers often?" His lips curved, not into a smile, but something close to it. No. The answer should have scared her more than it did. Instead, it stirred questions she didn't want to voice. Why her? Why tonight? The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second heavier than the last. Her body fought against the exhaustion pulling at her, but her mind stayed sharp, alert, unable to rest. As if sensing it, he leaned back in his chair. "You should sleep. The room upstairs is yours for the night." She shook her head quickly. "I'll stay down here." His gaze fixed on her, steady and unblinking. "You're not safe when you don't rest. Upstairs." Something about the way he spoke left her powerless to argue. She rose slowly, every step toward the staircase heavier than the last. Back in the guest room, she slipped under the covers. The sheets were warm, the pillow soft, but her body remained tense, ready to run if she had to. The storm outside raged on, wind pressing against the windows, rain hammering the glass. Inside, The house was silent, save for the faint echo of the fire downstairs. Her eyes closed. But sleep didn't come easy. She thought of the way he had looked at her like a puzzle he intended to solve. She thought of the car, the mansion, the suddenness of it all. She thought of how quickly danger had shifted form. Was she safe here? Or had she simply traded one danger for another she couldn't yet understand? When sleep finally claimed her, her last thought was a whisper of fear. What if morning didn't bring freedom? But chains she couldn't escape. Downstairs, he remained by the fire long after midnight, his mind somewhere far away. The flames flickered against his sharp features, making his expression unreadable. He didn't look like a man who had stumbled into helping a stranger. He looked like someone who had planned every step, and though she didn't know it yet, her arrival in his home wasn't chance. It was the beginning of something far larger, something she couldn't yet imagine. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, washing the room in pale gold. She blinked awake, disoriented at first. For a moment, the softness of the sheets and the silence of the room tricked her mind into believing she was safe, that the chaos of the night before had only been a bad dream. But then she sat up. The walls around her weren't familiar. The bed beneath her wasn't hers, and the faint smell of burning wood still drifted from the fireplace below. Her heart sank as reality returned. She was in his mansion. She moved quietly, her bare feet brushing against the thick carpet. The guest room looked untouched, to perfect, like it belonged in a magazine rather than real life. The longer she stayed in this place, the more it felt like a world she wasn't meant to be in. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The silence of the house was almost overwhelming. No voices, no footsteps, just the faint hum of something air conditioning, maybe whispering in the background. Her stomach growled softly, reminding her she hadn't eaten in nearly a day. The thought of food pushed her down the stairs, toward the smell of coffee drifting faintly through the air. She found him in the kitchen. He stood by the counter, dressed in a crisp suit that looked like it had been tailored just for him. His tie was perfectly in place. His watch gleamed under the light. Every part of him radiated control, as though not a single detail of his appearance happened by chance. He looked at her only briefly before sliding a plate across the counter. Toast, fruit, eggs, simple, yet set on fine china. Eat, he said. That she hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the food. You didn't have to. I don't do what I have to, he interrupted, his tone flat. I do what I choose. The words unsettled her, but hunger won. She sat at the counter, picking at the food carefully. It tasted better than anything she'd had in weeks, but she couldn't enjoy it fully. Not with him watching. His gaze lingered on her, not unkind, but heavy, like he was peeling back layers she didn't want to show. You haven't asked me who I am, he said finally. Her fork paused midair. Does it matter? He tilted his head, the faintest hint of a smirk touching his lips. It will, she frowned, unsure how to answer. The way he said it wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, as if his identity was something impossible to ignore. He set his cup down and leaned slightly closer. You should know where you've stepped. This house, it isn't just walls and floors. It's part of something bigger, and so am I. Her chest tightened. The way he spoke carried weight she couldn't quite place. Who was he really? A businessman? A politician? Something worse? She tried to change the subject. Thank you for letting me stay. His eyes softened for a brief second, then hardened again. Gratitude is useful, but don't mistake this for charity. Her fork clinked against the plate as her hands trembled. Then why help me? The silence stretched. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her again, as though deciding how much truth to reveal. At last, he said, because sometimes the right people appear at the right time. The words made her skin prickle. She wasn't sure if he meant it as fate or as something calculated. After breakfast, he stood. Stay inside today. Don't open the door. Don't answer the phone. Understand? Confusion knotted her chest. Why? Who would? Understand? His voice carried a sharp edge now, no room for hesitation. She nodded quickly. I understand. He gave a curt nod, then walked out, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor until the sound vanished completely. The moment he was gone, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wandered through the house, trying to make sense of it all. The walls were lined with bookshelves. the tables filled with art pieces that probably cost more than everything she had owned in her entire life. But as she looked closer, she noticed things that unsettled her. Files stacked neatly in a study, with names she didn't recognize. Locked drawers that seemed too important to be hidden in plain sight. A phone ringing once, then stopping as though silenced by unseen hands. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. And he wasn't just a stranger who had stopped to help her. Later that evening, as the sun sank and the sky outside turned crimson, he returned. His suit was still perfect, but his expression carried something harder now, sharper. She dared to ask, "What do you do?" For the first time, he laughed low, short, without humor. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." His eyes locked on hers, and in that moment, the mask he wore slipped just enough for her to see the truth beneath. "I build. I destroy. I decide who stays at the top and who falls. That's what I do." The room felt colder despite the warmth of the house. She stared at him, realizing this wasn't luck. She hadn't stumbled into the life of a kind stranger. She had walked into the world of a man whose power stretched farther than she could imagine. And now, whether she wanted it or not, she was part of it. The days slipped by, but freedom never returned. At first, she told herself it was just her imagination. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe the stranger's rules were just for her safety. But as the hours turned into days, the uneasy truth became harder to ignore. It started small. The doors. When she tried to step outside one morning, the front door didn't budge. She pressed the handle down again, harder this time, but it stayed locked. She checked the other exits: kitchen, side hall, even the back terrace. All the doors were sealed, as if the house had decided she wasn't allowed to leave. She went to ask him about it that evening when he returned. His suit as perfect as ever, his expression calm but unreadable. "The doors were locked," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes," he replied simply, pouring himself a drink as though it were the most normal thing in the world. "Why?" He turned, glass in hand, and fixed her with that heavy gaze that seemed to see through her. "Because you're not ready to go." "Not yet." Her heart skipped. "Not ready? What does that mean? I thought you said it was just one night." He sipped his drink, unbothered. "And if I had told you the truth, would you have stayed?" The room seemed to shrink around her. She wanted to argue, to shout, but his calmness pressed against her like a wall she couldn't climb. He didn't need to raise his voice to make her feel powerless. From then on, she began to notice more. Her phone gone. She had left it in her bag, but when she searched, it wasn't there. She asked him once, her voice shaking. He didn't deny it. He only said, "Phones are dangerous. They make people easy to find." His words made sense, but the way he said them left her hollow. If he truly wanted to protect her, why not let her decide for herself? The house itself became a maze. She explored when he was away, but doors she hadn't noticed before were locked tight. Drawers sealed, certain hallways leading only to dead ends. Cameras nestled in corners stared back at her, their blinking red lights a reminder she was never really alone. At night, she lay awake, listening to the silence of the mansion. Yet sometimes, faint sounds echoed through the halls, voices she couldn't place. Footsteps in the distance, doors opening and closing somewhere out of sight. Once, she caught him speaking in low tones on the phone. She couldn't hear the words, only the sharp edge in his voice, the clipped authority that left no room for disobedience. The man who had seemed calm and reserved in front of her now sounded ruthless, commanding. The longer she stayed, the more she realized the line between protection and possession had blurred. One evening, she tried again. She waited until he was in the study, then crept to the front door. Her hands trembled as she gripped the handle, pressing down with all her strength. It didn't move. She pressed harder, panic swelling inside her chest. She tugged, pulled, shoved, nothing. And then his voice came from behind her. Quiet, steady, but carrying the weight of someone who had expected this moment all along. "Do you really think you can leave like that?" She spun around, her breath caught in her throat. He stood in the doorway, his shadow long against the polished floor. "Why are you doing this?" She whispered. "You said I was safe here, but this feels like a cage." He stepped closer, not rushing, every movement precise. Safety and freedom are not the same thing. Her knees weakened, but she refused to look away. "So what am I to you? A guest? A prisoner?" His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing just enough to send a chill down her spine. "You're under my protection. That's all you need to know." It wasn't an answer. It was a verdict. From that night on, she stopped testing the doors. She stopped asking about her phone. She stopped pretending she had any real choice. Instead, she carried her questions silently, tucking them deep inside where he couldn't see them. But silence didn't ease her fear. It only made it grow. Even small freedoms began to slip. He dictated when she ate, when she rested. He didn't demand it outright. He never raised his voice, never shouted, but his words carried a weight that made defiance impossible. "Eat now, stay here, don't go upstairs," each instruction simple, each one wrapping tighter around her like invisible chains. She started to wonder if this had been his plan from the very beginning. Had he really stopped that night by chance? Or had everything been calculated? Every step laid out so she would end up exactly where he wanted her, inside his house, under his control. The thought made her stomach twist, but another thought made it worse. Maybe he had saved her from one danger, only to make her part of his own. The mansion that had once felt like shelter now felt like a trap. Every wall pressed closer, every locked door a reminder that she was no longer running. She was caught, and the man she had trusted, the one who had pulled her from the storm, wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was something far more dangerous. The days inside the mansion began to blur together. But one thing grew clearer with each passing moment. Nothing here was ordinary. At first, she had thought the locked doors, the missing phone, the endless silence were just his way of controlling her. But as she watched more closely, she began to see pieces of something larger, fragments of a truth she hadn't been meant to notice. It began one afternoon when she wandered into the study. She hadn't been invited there, but the door had been left open, and curiosity overcame her fear. The room was dim, shelves lined with books, but it was the desk that caught her eye. Papers were stacked neatly in piles, every sheet covered in notes, signatures, and bold company logos she didn't recognize. Beside them, a tablet flickered with unread messages. She only caught a glimpse before the screen dimmed, but she saw enough words like merger, rival, and elimination. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't the paperwork of a kind stranger with a big house. This was the language of someone who played on a level she couldn't even comprehend. She backed away quickly, afraid he might return and catch her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the words in her mind: rival, elimination. They weren't business terms, they were warnings. The next morning, while he was away, she explored further. She found a hidden hallway she hadn't noticed before, its entrance concealed behind a tall cabinet in the corner of a lounge. The passage was narrow and dimly lit, leading to a lower level. Her footsteps echoed softly as she descended, her heart pounding harder with every step. What she found there stopped her cold. Rows of screens lined the walls, each showing live feeds from different parts of the city. Streets, buildings, offices, places that had nothing to do with this house. Some screens showed names, lists, photos of people she had never met. And on one of them, her own face stared back at her. Her knees nearly gave out. She stumbled closer, staring in disbelief. Her picture was pinned beside a series of files she couldn't understand. Dates, codes, notes she couldn't decipher. But one word stood out, written in bold letters beside her name: asset. She staggered back, her breath quick and shallow. An asset? What did that mean? Before she could think, a voice came from behind her, calm, sharp, inevitable. "You weren't supposed to see this." She spun around. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. Her lips trembled. "What is all this? Why is my face here?" He stepped into the room slowly, his presence filling the space like a shadow. "Because you've been pulled into something bigger than yourself." Her chest ached as if her heart might break. "Bigger? I never asked for this. I was just running. And that," he interrupted, his voice steady, "is why you were found." She shook her head, backing away. No, I didn't choose this. You dragged me here." His gaze hardened. "You think chance brought me to you that night? That I just happened to be driving by?" He let out a low, humorless laugh. "Nothing in my life is chance." Her stomach twisted as the pieces fell into place. The open car door, the ready clothes, the locked mansion. None of it had been random. None of it had been mercy. Then why me? She whispered, her voice breaking. He stopped only a few feet away, his eyes fixed on her like a hawk. Because you matter to the people who want to see me destroyed. And if they want you, then you belong to me. Her breath caught, horror flooding her chest. She remembered the nights of running, the feeling of being chased, the shadows that had followed her. She had thought they were after her, but now she understood they were after him. And she had been caught in the middle, nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't even know existed. Tears blurred her vision. So all of this, it was never about helping me. It was about winning against them. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. You're safe here because you're useful here. Outside, you're a weakness waiting to be exploited. Inside, you're under my control. Her hands trembled at her sides. Safe, useful, control. The words clanged in her ears like chains. She turned to the screens again, her own face staring back at her. I'm not your asset, she said, her voice shaking, but louder than before. For the first time, his expression shifted. Not anger, not softness, something darker, something that made the air between them heavy. You already are, he said quietly. She felt the weight of the truth pressed down on her. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't even a prisoner. She was a piece on his board, part of his war. Her life tied to his battles whether she wanted it or not. The stranger who had saved her from the rain wasn't just a man with power. He was the storm itself, and she was caught in it. The storm outside had finally cleared, but inside the mansion, the air felt heavier than ever. She sat in the guest room with the curtains drawn tight, her eyes fixed on nothing. The words he had spoken the night before echoed in her mind like chains rattling in the dark. You're not safe because you're useful. You belong to me. She hugged her knees to her chest, rocking gently without realizing it. Every corner of the mansion felt like it was closing in. The glittering chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the endless halls, it all seemed less like luxury now and more like walls of a gilded cage. When she finally stood and opened the curtains, she froze. At the edge of the estate, just beyond the tall gates, she thought she saw figures. 2 men, maybe 3, dressed in dark coats. They stood too still to be casual passers-by. One of them raised a phone to his ear. Her heart thudded. Were they the ones who had chased her before, or new enemies of his? Either way, she knew the truth. She wasn't trapped only by him. Danger waited outside. The door creaked open behind her. She spun around. He stood there, framed in the doorway, his presence filling the room. You saw them, he said. Not as a question, but as a fact. She swallowed hard. Who are they? People who would use you to get to me. His tone was calm, steady, but the cold edge beneath it made her skin prickle. Then let me go, she pleaded. If they want me, I'll disappear. I'll leave this city, this country. His eyes narrowed. Do you think they'll just let you vanish? Do you think the world works like that? Her voice cracked. And what's the alternative? Stay here, locked away like a prisoner? He stepped closer, his gaze sharp, relentless. Not a prisoner. Protected. Safe here, no one can touch you. Her chest tightened. Safe doesn't feel like this, she whispered. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not softness, but something like frustration. He set his jaw, then turned toward the window, watching the figures near the gates. You don't understand, he said quietly. In my world, you don't get to choose. You survive by aligning yourself with power, or you don't survive at all. The silence that followed stretched painfully. She realized then that this wasn't just about her. He wasn't speaking to her as a stranger he had saved. He was speaking as a man who had lived his life in battles she couldn't see. Battles where choice was a luxury. Her throat tightened. Maybe I don't want your world. He turned back, and the weight of his stare pinned her in place. Then you'll be destroyed by it. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to look away. Maybe that's better than belonging to someone I never asked for. The room went still. The air between them was thick with something unsaid, something sharp and dangerous. Finally, he took a step back. You'll have to decide, he said. Stay here, under my protection, where no one can touch you, or walk out that door and face the ones waiting. But if you walk away, his eyes hardened. There's no coming back. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Stay, and she would live, but at what cost? Leave, and she might never survive the night. Her gaze drifted to the window again. The men were still there, shadows against the fading daylight. Her pulse raced as she thought of running into the unknown, alone once more. But then she turned back to him, the man who had locked her in, taken her choices, and yet stood as the only shield between her and the world outside. Her voice shook as she spoke. If I stay, will I always be under your control? He didn't hesitate. Yes, the truth stung like fire. She wanted him to lie, to offer comfort, but he never did. Her legs trembled as she stood. She walked past him slowly, every step like dragging chains. The grand staircase stretched below her, the locked doors waiting at the bottom. She placed her hand on the railing, her breath quick and shallow. At the base of the stairs, she stopped. He had followed her quietly, his eyes watching, waiting. She looked back at him, her heart torn in two. Safety with chains, freedom with danger. Her hand brushed the cold metal of the front door. She could feel the lock, heavy and unyielding beneath her fingers. Her throat tightened. She could demand it open, force her choice, even if it meant facing death. Or she could step back into the mansion, accept the safety of his power, and give up the life she had once dreamed of. The silence was unbearable. Finally, she whispered, I don't know which is worse. His expression didn't change, but his eyes, those unreadable eyes, watched her with something she couldn't name. The final choice was hers, and as she stood there, torn between the storm outside and the storm standing behind her, she realized that running had never been the real danger. The danger had always been trusting.